Salutations, one and all, and welcome to RWBY Revisited. In this installment, let's continue where we left off last month and analyze some more powers and abilities from RWBY and see just where they fall in relation to each other. Please be aware that spoilers for all seasons will follow, and any material revealed or expounded upon in outside sources will not be weighted as heavily as that seen in the show. So if a power acts differently in expanded works, then I won't be factoring that in here. Also note that this is part 2 of the tier list, so if you haven't seen that one yet, you can find it linked. Additionally, I would like to thank all of you who watched that video as it performed exceedingly well.
You're breathtaking! You're all breathtaking!
Genuinely, I would like to thank all of you. That helps out my tiny channel immensely. Now, several of the powers here have been seen rather scarcely, so I'm going to have to make some logical deductions on them. So their placement may be more tentative than others. But without further ado, let's get into it. Kicking things off, let's take a look at a semblance that many of you mentioned in the last video, Glinda Goodwitch's semblance. Telekinesis. This power allows Glinda to manipulate objects without having to physically interact with them. She can even lift objects that she likely couldn't with her own muscle, such as rubble. I originally didn't put this semblance into the first video because we haven't really seen Glinda show off just what she can do with it in a fight, as it's almost always shown off for utility. We don't know the upper threshold of what she can manipulate, how many objects can be moved, the potential force she can put behind them, or how taxing this is for her. For example, when we first see Glinda in action, she comes to RWBY's aid against Torchwick and Cinder, who are about to escape in an airship. She relies mostly on dust in that fight, though she does form the debris created by Cinder into a trail to strike their vehicle. This doesn't do any severe damage to the airship though, indicating that this had less force behind it than certain Grimm can bring to bear. She also didn't just crumple the ship into a ball or smash it into the ground, though that could have possibly been to avoid endangering any nearby civilians. Though her shower of ice spikes is questionable in that regard, but she can do more than just move objects. This semblance can even repair that which has been broken, such as walls. Theoretically, this could be used on the defensive side. Imagine if you were trying to hold out behind a defensive position like a wall or gate. Explosives would be great in breaking that down. But if you can just immediately put it back together, then that severely hampers your attacker's ability to get to you, possibly long enough for help to arrive. This could even be used to disarm opponents, telekinetically wrenching their weapons out of their hands, or redirecting projectiles away from you and your allies. You could even throw objects to hit foes that are out of your line of sight. It's an extremely versatile power. If she can also affect others with this power, then Glinda could toss enemies around like rag dolls, or even use it on herself or others to essentially grant the ability to fly. Thus, I'll be placing this in S tier. While I wish we knew just what the limits of Glinda's semblance are, being able to manipulate objects remotely is extremely powerful. Moving on, Team Coffee are fan favorites, though their screen time was quite limited. Coco is their leader, and her semblance is called Hype. This allows her to increase the effectiveness of dust. This is most commonly seen amplifying the power of her minigun. Given that weapons in RWBY use dust as ammunition, this allows her rounds to have increased kinetic energy, shown tearing apart the very ground. In an open battlefield, this can be an exceptional boon. However, this can be detrimental if put into an environment where over-penetration isn't desired. Imagine if you have this semblance, and there are Grimm moving towards a group of civilians, or there are hazardous materials behind the Grimm. If your shots blast straight through the Grimm and keep going, then you very well could end up killing the people behind them or setting off the volatile chemicals. This is why combat in urban settings is so challenging, especially if there are civilians. You have to be careful of rounds going through walls and injuring or killing non-combatants, like civilians or hostages. Back to the point though, this can also be valuable against specific targets that could be difficult to take down, like large Grim or vehicles. And given the semblance's description of amplifying dust, this could theoretically allow her to amplify dust in other forms, like raw crystals or grenades if such exist. We don't know if such is possible, but if vehicles also run off dust, then Coco could possibly allow them to have greater fuel efficiency. I would place this power in B tier, though it could possibly be higher if it can affect dust in other usages besides ammunition. It's powerful, but if used in the wrong situation, it could be detrimental, and it does rely on having dust available. The second member of Team Coffee, Fox Alistair's semblance is telepathy. This allows him to communicate directly with others without needing to speak. While this hasn't been seen to any noticeable effect in the show, some information does come from other media. This ability is more effective if the targets are close to him, and it can allow him to sense if others are nearby, which would make stealth tactics against him ineffective, though this can be difficult to use stealthily himself, as using this ability on someone makes them feel as though they're being watched, possibly putting them on alert, or causing them to avoid thinking about or revealing sensitive information. Now, depending on how exactly his telepathy works, this may allow him to directly communicate intent, removing any possibility of miscommunication. Imagine never having a misunderstanding because either you or whoever you were speaking to worded something poorly. This ability can also be used on dozens of people at once, though this is taxing and thus should be saved for emergencies. But the possibility of using this on an enemy in combat can't be ignored. While we don't know the exact capabilities of this semblance, this may allow Fox to glean information on what tactics his enemy may be about to employ. If an opponent is actively thinking about their strategy, then that may be easily accessible to him and thus allow him to counter it. This is hypothetical, of course, and if an opponent decides to engage in melee and rely on muscle memory and in-the-moment actions, this will be less effective. While I wish we knew more about just what telepathy can and can't do for Fox, I'm going to slot this into A tier, though this could reasonably be an S tier or B tier if its capabilities are higher or lower than what I've described. Velvet is the third member of her team, and her semblance is called photographic memory. This allows her to perfectly mimic the physical techniques that she has witnessed. This is a powerful ability and could even allow one to kickstart their training in a specific martial art. Though without practice, you won't be able to perform maneuvers without thinking about them, especially if it's something you aren't familiar with. One major factor in how skilled fighters are so good is that they don't need to think about what their next move will be. They've trained for so long that they can act and react without ever thinking about what to do next. If you've only learned through mimicking others, you won't have that muscle memory built up. Another drawback to this semblance is that if an opponent relies on a weapon, then that cannot be copied by the semblance. Velvet mitigates this by using her own weapon, which can form various shapes with hard light dust, though this relies on her having dust available to use and not being disarmed. This semblance's effectiveness is directly proportionate to the experience of the wielder. First picking up a moveset will require time to acclimate and practice with, but over time, these various moves can meld together into a unique fighting style that few will be able to read. This is a pretty balanced ability, and thus I'll be slotting it into B tier. Effective in melee, though of limited use for opponents at a distance. Remember that her weapon is used for mimicking ranged abilities. The fourth member of Team Coffee is Yatsuhashi, and his semblance is memory wiping. This allows him to alter or temporarily delete the memories of others. This has, as of now, never been seen in the show, so all information comes from outside sources. Trivial matters can be deleted entirely, though important ones will be recovered over time. How exactly the difference is determined is unknown though. Yatsuhashi seemingly caused his mother to forget about his baby sister for an entire day with this power, and that seems rather important. It's stated that this ability is strenuous, so this may limit its abilities somewhat, though if he uses it on himself, he can resist other powers that would affect his mind, such as illusions or mind control. What's more, He was able to cure a memory-degrading disease with this power, and if used in an almighty burst, he can seemingly put someone into a vegetative state, though that was under a unique set of circumstances. This ability could be used to subdue a target, causing them to forget tactical information or even forget why they're fighting and surrender. This could possibly be able to defy powers like Robin's semblance, as if someone can't remember the truth, then they aren't really lying. While the information is scant on this power, what we do know shows us a monumentally powerful ability, and thus I'll be placing it into S tier. Warping someone's mind, even temporarily, is nothing to scoff at. Maria has an interesting semblance, called preflexes. This allows her to react more quickly to things going on around her, even perceiving things outside of her sight. While the description of this power is simple, this is a remarkable ability. This can allow her to effectively fight against multiple opponents at once, as she can perceive what each of them is doing, which helps to negate their numbers advantage. Or if an enemy is taking aim from a distance, it would likely proc this semblance, allowing Maria to evade fire from snipers. This power isn't unbeatable though, as she can still be overwhelmed in a fight, such as when she lost her eyes, or how she was fooled by the illusions of Emerald. This also does nothing to negate anything that an enemy is doing. It's still up to Maria to act on that information, so if there's something incoming that she can't do anything about, then she'll just know that she's going to be taken out without being able to stop it. This is a straightforward and effective ability, and thus I will be placing it in A tier. Very strong, but not completely overpowered. We know the semblances of two members of Team Funky. Flint Cole's semblance is called Killer Quartet, and it allows him to project up to 3 copies of himself that all mimic his actions. These duplicates also come equipped with a copy of his weapon and any gear that he may have been wearing. This lets him directly amplify the effectiveness of his attacks, as he'll be doing the equivalent of 4 strikes instead of just 1. Thus, he can directly outnumber another individual combatant by himself. While powerful, this isn't without its drawbacks. Firstly, Flint must maintain his concentration while keeping this ability active, which may allow him to be blindsided. If you're having to keep your mind on maintaining the semblance, then you may end up with tunnel vision. Secondly, each of these copies has a slight delay from his initial action, with each copy being slightly slower to act than the previous. This means that an opponent can possibly evade or negate their attacks, as they will only mimic his actions. They don't have the ability to act on their own, so they can't be used to watch other angles or respond to threats that Flint himself isn't aware of. Overall though, this is a mighty semblance that can act as a direct power increase, and thus I put it in A tier. It has some flaws, but its strengths are more numerous. Neon Cat is the other member of the team whose semblance we've seen, and hers is called Rainbow. At first glance, this seems like another speed-based semblance like RWBY or Harriet's powers, but upon closer examination, it functions a bit differently. Instead of allowing her to move faster directly, it instead provides thrust. She also doesn't seem to be able to reach the speeds of the previously mentioned characters, so she won't be darting around faster than someone can realistically react to. Using this power also creates a vivid rainbow trail behind her, which is easily visible to anyone within a line of sight, and is just plain tacky.
If you don't think that's bad, guess what? Then you're tacky too.
This can potentially be used to draw attention though, creating a distraction for other allies to capitalize on. Our eyes are involuntarily drawn to movement and bright lights. This semblance creates both. If Neon uses this increased thrust to avoid incoming fire, then other allies could attack freely while their enemies are focused on her. Still, she seems to rely on using this semblance along with her roller skates. This is unwise, I'd say. Imagine how those would fare trying to move over mud, snow, sand, or other difficult terrain. This could lead to her just face-planting into the ground. Supposedly, this semblance helps her keep her balance, though I question this information, as she's shown in her first encounter to trip and fall. The skates might work on flat, urban terrain, but I'd recommend ditching them anywhere else. This might make her slower, but that's preferable to getting stuck while in combat. As such, I would slot this into B tier. It has its uses, and it's fairly well rounded. Also from the Vital Festival, we have the semblance called Sand Skating, used by Octavia Ember. This allows her to slide along sand at high speeds. While increased mobility is definitely a good ability, this one is far too contextual to be rated highly. Think about it. How often do you find yourself on sand? Outside of a desert or a beach? Maybe in a park? You probably won't get too much mileage out of this. Now, we don't know if there needs to be a lot of sand, or if this can be used on even a light coating of sand on the ground, but even then, it still relies on sand being present to activate. Unless you limit your operations to one of the previously mentioned biomes, then you may as well not have a semblance. I'll be placing this in F tier. The speed bonus is nice, but it's just too reliant on outside factors to be worth it, especially when there are objectively better versions of this power. Also, seen in that same tournament fight, is Scarlet David's semblance of gliding. This is also a simple power, as it allows him to glide on the air, even without a wind current. This can be useful, like saving your life if you fall from a high elevation, or even to use a high place to increase your mobility by jumping from it and gliding. This may not be such a good idea to use in combat though. If you're gliding through the air, chances are there won't be much cover from ranged weapons, leaving you as an easy target unless you get out of the way quickly. Given that this semblance is called gliding and not flying, this implies that it doesn't generate lift, meaning that it only allows the user to drift, all the while losing altitude. Given that this is slightly more applicable than skating across sand, I'm placing this in C tier. Still not amazing, but useful in certain conditions. But let's look at something completely off the wall. Salem was cursed with immortality by the gods. While not necessarily a power in the normal sense, let's have a look at it anyway. Now, you may be thinking, hey, this has to be S tier, right? How could being completely unkillable be anything else? And you're right about its strength. This ensures that Salem can never outright lose a confrontation. The best an opponent could do would be to stall and escape. Note that this is immortality, not indestructibility. She can still suffer any injury, it's just that she recovers from it given time. Even being completely destroyed by a bomb put her out of commission for only a few hours. So if it's so strong, why am I still not slotting it into the highest tier already? Well, there's another factor to consider. Your mind. You see, unlike the elves in The Lord of the Rings, the human psyche and instincts aren't designed to handle everlasting life. Just listen to how an old person tells you that time speeds up as you age. That's because your perception of it changes. When you're born and live for 1 year, a year is 100% of your life. To become 2 years old, you have to double your context of life. That's why a year seems to last forever when you're a kid. But once you hit about 20, a year is only 1/20th of your life. A much smaller percentage, and it will only shrink the older you get. This makes it feel like time speeds up. Now apply that to what Salem must have gone through. Even if we applied this to someone not evil, your sense of time would be so far removed from normal people that you would eventually become completely alien to them. The lives of everyone else would be a heartbeat to you. Civilizations would rise and fall before your eyes. You could become friends with someone, only to blink and then be speaking to their great-grandkid. You would eventually lose your ability to relate to such short-lived beings. Everyone you love will fade away. Nothing you care about would last. It would only be a matter of time before your sanity shatters. You may be immune to losing any confrontation, but you would ultimately lose your mind to time itself. So I'm going to compromise and put this directly in the middle in B tier. It's S tier for combat, but F tier for your mind. You'd eventually see everything there is to see and do everything there is to do. You would break at some point, be that centuries or millennia. We saw another semblance briefly used in a flashback, used by Rhodes. His semblance is Metal Skin, which, as its name implies, allows him to temporarily change his skin into metal. Given its dull gray color, I will assume that this is iron or something akin to it, as opposed to something like bronze, copper, or gold. This would be quite useful in combat. Lacerations would likely be almost impossible to inflict, and it could possibly stop bullets of weaker calibers.
Now, what do you have a bullet, and the hope that when your guns are empty, I'm no longer standing?
Though, let's take a closer look at it. Given that this is called metal skin, this implies that just his skin takes on this property and not the muscle and bone underneath. So if that's the case, then this opens up some possibilities that could be exploited by enemies. If you look at the medieval times, as armor became more advanced, blunt weapons became more common than blades. You see, a sword isn't going to cut metal, but a mace, hammer, or flail can damage the tissue beneath it. This may hold true for Rhodes. Blunt force trauma could possibly damage his muscles, bones, and organs if hit hard enough, and higher-powered rifles and the like could possibly still punch through him. This could also leave him susceptible to certain dust effects, like fire or electricity, as it could be conducted. Still, this would be very valuable against Grimm and any opponent who doesn't have such dust readily available. I'll put this in B tier. Not too strong, but not particularly weak either. We also get a glimpse of the semblances of Team Briar in RWBY Arrowfell, starting off with their leader, Bianca Prisma. Her semblance is called Refraction, and it allows her to copy the semblances of others. We don't get many mechanics revealed about this power, but I'm going to make some inferences here. We see that she copies the semblances of her present teammates. Given that she chooses to do this instead of pulling out any other semblance from another friend or foe, I suspect that she may be limited to mimicking the semblances of those nearby. So on her own, she doesn't have a true semblance, but she can have the ability of someone nearby. She can even mirror multiple semblances at once. This is powerful indeed, but it isn't perfect. In addition to my hypothetical limitation of this power, there's the tell that she's copying someone's semblance by showing their reflection in her daggers. If someone knows what this means, then she'd be telegraphing her next move. What's more, copying someone's power doesn't transfer their mastery of it. When someone has had a semblance for their whole life, they'll know how to use it much more precisely and effectively than you, who have just mirrored it. This means that you'll be fighting them on their own terms. They'll likely be much better than you at using it, and you may not be aware of its limitations, or even what exactly it does. Still, this is applicable in any fight against someone with a semblance, and can help to even the playing field. So I'm putting this in A tier for its strength. Next up in Team Briar is Inferno, the semblance of Roan Ashwood. It's stated to directly increase her weapon's firepower.
What?
That's a bit of a vague description, but it would seem to indicate that it makes her weapon deal more damage than it otherwise would. Given that she wields a flamethrower as her primary weapon, I'll take that to mean that it burns for hotter and longer than it would under normal circumstances. So this is a direct steroid for whatever weapon the wielder uses. Given that, many of the strengths and weaknesses of Coco's hype apply here as well, as these are very similar, though the description specifies that it only affects weapons, while Coco may or may not be able to affect other types of dust. This semblance also has a tell that it's being used, as Roan's hair glows a bright red when it's being used, giving away her plan to observant opponents. Given that this semblance is very akin to hype, I will be putting it in B tier as well. Next up is Threshold, used by Ivy Thickety. This allows her to create small portals for her weapon to travel through. This can allow it to reach far beyond melee range, or even to bypass armor or other barriers. More interestingly though, it can duplicate the weapon as well. When Ivy lashes out with her whip, the tip enters a portal, and 2 subsequent exits are generated, each with their own whip being projected through it. So this means that she can essentially wield more than one weapon at once. We don't know just how many portals can be generated this way, but that would allow the user to strike multiple targets at once, or a single target from numerous directions simultaneously. This would even be stealthier than a ranged weapon, most of which will create substantial noise when fired. As such, this will also earn a place in A tier. Very strong, but not overwhelming. The final member of Team Briar is Ruda Tillaroot, and her semblance is named Delve. This allows her to become intangible and quickly move beneath the ground, reappearing again at a destination of her choosing. This can allow for quick escapes, evasions, or to attack from unexpected angles. There's little an enemy could do to quickly counter this semblance, as cover would always be available to Ruda, seeing as she can just duck beneath the earth. The main downsides of this power is that ducking underground would break the line of sight with the target, and it may be difficult to attack them directly if they have high mobility. This semblance would also be less useful in multi-floored buildings, as ducking through the floor would just deposit Ruda on the level below.
He's in the walls.
Still, this is an ability with great potential, and so I'll place it in A tier. It can be used to quickly overwhelm enemies, especially if used in conjunction with allies. But shifting things a bit, let's take a look at a power that the Grimm possess. The Apathy have a power of the same name that saps any nearby humans and faunus of the will to do anything at all. As the name implies, those affected quickly become apathetic to everything, including imminent danger. Even if kept secured, their effect persists throughout the immediate area, and resulted in the residents of Brunswick Farms simply lying down in their beds until they simply died. Even when Team RWBY were aware of their impending doom from the Apathy, their power made it difficult for them to take any action at all. This power can be resisted, though only for a brief while.
But I've got a gun. I don't care.
Thus, I will put this power into A tier. It's very effective, and those under its effects only have a short while to break free before falling too deeply into it. Finally, let's look at the Silver Eyes. This seems to be a genetic trait that allows those with these eyes to outright slay standard Grimm, or severely weaken or incapacitate stronger ones, such as the Wyvern or Leviathan. This takes the form of a blinding white light emitted from the user's eyes, sometimes in the form of wings. While powerful, this ability is also niche, as it only affects Grimm. Outside of that, someone with silver eyes is no different from anyone else. If one could use this power like a flashbang, then it would be much more applicable, though we have, as of yet, seen no such capabilities. These eyes may also be a threat to Salem, as she seems to want those who bear them either dead or used as part of her experiments. But given that this is used to kill Grimm and not simply evade them, I'll be placing this in B tier. Very effective, but only against one kind of enemy. And that will conclude this addition to the powers tier list. What do you think of my assessment? Do you think I'm in the right, or have I blundered? Some of these powers haven't been seen much, and we don't have a lot of information on others, so I slotted them in as best I could with the information we have available to us. Some could very well be worthy of a higher or lower position than where I placed them. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and leave a like on this video if you're so inclined, and subscribe to see more. I would like to thank you for watching, and may you all have a weapon in each hand.